challenging partisan gerrymandering, a pretty novel cause of action in American courts, and as I'll describe in just a moment. And the good news, from my perspective at least, is that I'm 2 for 2. We got verdicts for plaintiffs in both times, and there's a third matter, the Pennsylvania case that you may have read news reports about, used the same legal theory, and the expert witness there was one of my former Stanford students, and using essentially the same methodology. So in some sense, this theory now is 3 for 3, and it raises an interesting point, one from the Electoral Integrity Project, I think ought to be thinking about, and I'm sure they do already, and that is, and perhaps this reflects a particularly American take on this issue, but courts are kind of where the action's at in a lot of this, waiting for the politicians to improve electoral integrity off their own bat is a bit of a fool's errand in the United States. And I think for me, just personally in terms of my own career, getting out from behind the political science desk and into court with political science research, one of the most interesting things I've ever done. Like you want to move the football in the United States, to use a very American metaphor, get a lawyer, go to court. There are 3 branches of government, and political scientists, Congress and the presidency, but courts are, in the US at least, are a really important part of the equation, and it's where I think everything from racial gerrymandering cases and Voting Rights Act, there's a long history of political science and lawyers working together. This is sort of, I think, if you will, another chapter in that, in how political science can actually have real-world impacts, but at least in the United States, that runs through working with lawyers. So let me talk about gerrymandering now. Our context is unmistakably a two-party system. And so, United States or state legislatures, but for that matter, any single-member, simple plurality system. And a districting plan is simply a geographic partitioning of the jurisdictions in the United States. The states are divided up to form districts for their own state legislatures or for Congress. And gerrymandering is simply the drawing of lines to favour one party, the other, and classically that manifests, look at the funny shape, right? That's kind of been, Anthony was just talking about the art and science. Well, this is like, a lot of this has been art. It's been quite, if you will, almost postmodern. That's obviously, right, that's the eponymous gerrymander. And then people would go, well, clearly that's got to be a gerrymander because, look at the weird shape, and there's North Carolina from a few plans ago, the weird shape. And indeed, it's so famous, the idea that gerrymandering is shape is so famous that, we'll come back to these 2 people in a minute, but that was their wedding cake. Combined communities of interest, the Chicago-based couple. But I'd like to stress to you that shape is neither necessary nor sufficient. It's a rather old fuddy-duddy way of thinking about what gerrymandering is. Reminds me a little bit like, what's pornography or what's jazz. I know it when I see it, I know it when I hear it. Gerrymandering, you know it when you see it on the map. And literally in court, I had defense attorneys representing the state of North Carolina holding up maps to me and saying, how about that? Is that a gerrymander? Is that a gerrymander? And you just got to bat that away. Don't be silly. Don't be silly. Because with modern software, it's perfectly easy these days to draw shapes that are aesthetically pleasing, but nonetheless confer systematic and profound advantage for one side of politics and the other. So it's not about shape anymore, and frankly kind of never really was, at least technically, in reality, despite what made its way into the press or made its way occasionally into court. How does this become a constitutional in the US? It's worth just real briefly touching on that. For a long time, malapportionment has been unconstitutional. And growing up in Queensland, doing my undergrad degree in Queensland, one of the things we were taught at UQ was don't confound malapportionment with gerrymandering, as a lot of Australian journalists will want to do with the references to the Playmander and the Bielke-mander. The dominant mechanism of electoral manipulation there was malapportionment. That's been unconstitutional in the United States since at least 1960. But what about partisan gerrymandering? And there's a line of cases that says, you know, okay, so this thing exists and you can bring suit, but we are, because of potential violations of the First and the 14th Amendments of the US Constitution, and the 14th, of course, is equal protection, right? So that the state can't discriminate among classes of people. So there's a bit of legal legwork to do ahead of time. Are Democrats or Republicans a class? So how do you get standing and all that? But after you've cleared that hurdle, then you're down the road to a 14th Amendment or even a First Amendment type argument that gets you into court. So that's fine, but where the courts have been hung up is, okay, but what's a standard? What would constitute evidence of partisan gerrymandering such that we as a court would feel empowered, or we've seen enough to go in and turn over the plan that's been enacted by the state legislature, or some other body for that matter. So a little bit of theory here. So a districting plan is the thing we're going to try and characterise now and quite literally quantify the extent to which it may present evidence of being a gerrymander. And so we need some formalisation for that. And so we'll talk about this object called the seats votes curve. And it's really what an electoral system is. An electoral system maps votes into seats. So it's a if you will, now we're sort of putting a mathematical formalism on this. There's a function S that takes V's and turns them into S's, right? Turns votes into seats. And if that were symmetric in a two-party system, then if your votes are just 1 minus my votes, and what we'd like is that if you got the same vote share that I got, you would get the same seat share that I got. So there's a symmetry here, that if I got V% of the vote and that gave me S% of the seats, it would imply that the same thing would happen to you. And indeed, a particular instance of that is that, you know, if we split the vote, I've written that the wrong way, that should be S of V, but the seat share I get when I get 50% of the vote should be 50% of the seats. And that's sort of an implication of that requirement. And indeed, what happens at a 50-50 split of the two-party vote, that goes by a special name in the literature. The extent to which the seat share departs from 50-50, given a 50-50 split of the vote, is called partisan bias. And the easiest way to think about this is with some graphs. Proportional representation is, you know, there are no districts in that. Basically, your share of the seats in the legislature is just your share of the vote. But as I guess almost everybody in this room knows, that under single-member district systems, you tend to get a curve rather than this 45-degree line. And the slope of this curve is known as, in the literature, is called responsiveness. And indeed, if there are a lot of marginal seats, in the limit, this will become almost a step function. Right? One vote is enough to flip all the, very tiny change in vote sees a whole bunch of seats flip over. And then this bias idea is that the curve runs through the 50-50 point. Right? And so this is sort of has been in the literature for, a century, as a way of thinking about what happens with an electoral system. This, a mathematical formalism for this idea that electoral systems map votes into seats. And this idea of partisan bias is, if we zoom right in now we're just looking at the range 40 to 60, here's the 50-50 point, here's a seat votes, here's an electoral system that confers advantage to the blue party, in that they with less than 50% of the votes, they can win a majority of seats in the legislature. And indeed, if they were to win 50% of the votes, they would win something like, what's this, about 54% of the seats. And alternatively, here's a system, again, you see negative bias here, where this party, the red party here, is winning 50% of the votes, but is only getting about 46% of the seats. So the extent to which these vertical distances are partisan bias. And this was the primary tool that political scientists used for about 80 years, and went to court with this back in this case called LULAC. And this is sort of a great kick in the guts to political science when the court said, no, we don't like partisan bias. And because you're asking us to entertain a hypothetical 50-50 election, and that's not necessarily the election we got. Well, it was 52-48, and if we just shift everything back 2 points, no, we don't want to do that. That's hypothetical. Really? That's hypothetical? Yeah, that's hypothetical. And there's no, the statistical modelling, no, we don't want any of that. And so political scientists, I was here in Australia on a holiday when, we were furiously writing an amicus brief for this. In the end, I didn't because I was on holiday in Australia. But it was about 7 or 8 political science friends of mine wrote an amicus brief that the court sort of went, oh, that's interesting, but we don't want to go down that road. We need something that is, in this lovely euphemism, judicially administrable, meaning people that don't know math or statistics need to be able to do this. We can't come running back to professors of statistics every time we want to draw the boundaries and that was devastating. That kind of stopped the field in its tracks. Everybody's like, oh. We'll just say for the end if you don't mind. I'm trying to get through a ton of material pretty quickly. And so that drove the profession back to the drawing board. And this nice idea came out of this idea of wasted votes. This is Eric McGee, political science, who works at the California Public Policy Institute. And Nick Stephanopoulos, whose wedding cake you saw earlier, he's a lawyer at the University of Chicago. They together wrote these 2 pieces, very nice, that wasted votes and the efficiency that I'll explain in a moment. And then I was asked to, well, does this thing actually work? And so I did a ton of statistical work, which I presented to court twice now, one in Gilby-Whitford, which we won, and now the state of Wisconsin has appealed up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court heard oral argument back in October, November, so a decision is thought to be imminent. And then in November of last year, we won in a congressional case in North Carolina. Both times there are 3-judge bench trials, and we got plaintiffs both times. And we also, well, the theory won in Pennsylvania, where because of the way their laws are written, didn't go into the federal courts. That was heard in the state courts in Pennsylvania. So what's the idea? Wasted votes are votes that are cast that do not generate a seat for you. And so the way gerrymandering works is this idea of packing and cracking. The packing is I take partisans of one party and tend to lock them up in a relatively small number of districts. The incumbent, by the way, is quite happy. He's winning or she's winning per district by, outsized margins. Not bad for the incumbent, but bad for the party overall. The vote is locked up, if you will. And then the cracking part is you take the other partisans and just distribute them around other districts such that they never form a majority. So the other party wins those. And if you do that the right way, packing and cracking, you can confer a lasting advantage that manifests in this differential in wasted votes. So when I'm wasting more votes than you, I'm at a disadvantage. It means I'm winning seats more. The seats I win by margins larger than I strictly need to. And both of us are always doing that, right? The most efficient thing to do is to win a seat just by one vote. Maybe not, it's efficient in a very technical sense. But we're both doing that. The question is, It's really about the difference in wasted votes, and that concept is called the efficiency gap. And it's really about this idea of asymmetry between the parties, right? And because at the end of the day, you want to link this up to a 14th Amendment claim, that there's something going on in the electoral system that treats the parties differently. This idea of asymmetry. It's not that there's wasted votes or things are more or less efficient. It's that whatever is happening in the system is happening asymmetrically with respect to the parties. And the nice thing about this is that the way it's been framed, and I'll show you on the next slide, is that there's absolutely no statistical modelling necessary. You can literally on the back of an envelope compute this thing. And that's what we did. There's the happy team. So that's Nick, and that's Ruth. And Ruth is a graduate of the University of Sydney. And Sydney, and I got to say, there is a bit of an Australian connection here. That's kind of how they wrote me in. But and this is outside federal court in Greensboro, North Carolina. And this is the lead attorney, and she has just delivered her closing address, and little did she know that she just won the case. But we were feeling pretty good that day outside court. Been a good trial. Yeah, so Nick, that's Nick Stephanopoulos. He's the lawyer, very good empirical social scientist. But I think, and could have done a lot of what I did, but I think wanted to be an attorney on the case as well, and so got in. They sort of utilized me. So here's what we showed the court in North Carolina, and to sort of demonstrate how easy this is. North Carolina had 13 districts, and for each, we can perform this wasted vote calculation in each of the districts. So we asked, who won? So let's just look at the first district. The Democrat won, and won 70-30 basically. And so how many votes did the Democrat win? Well, it's the votes in excess of the plurality needed to win. So here it's 69,547 votes. The Republican got 101,567 votes, but didn't win a seat. So from the Republicans' perspective, all of those votes were wasted. Votes that were cast that did not yield a seat. And then we can simply do that for each district. So District 2, the Republican won, the Democrat lost, so all of the Democrat votes are wasted votes. It was a 57-43 win for the Republican. So 221,485 minus the plurality needed to win is 26,000 wasted votes there, and we can just compute that and then tally, and we get the wasted votes for the Democrat versus the wasted votes for the Republican. And you can see what's going on here. There's so many more wasted votes cast by Democrats, for Democratic candidates than cast for Republican candidates. And it's that difference in this number expressed as a ratio of the total votes cast that gives us this quantity, so -19, -0.19. And that's the number. And what's nice about this is that you can kind of get down from the witness box and literally do it in real time before the judges. And they go, wow, that seems really simple, because it is. There's no modeling, this is literally counting, which is great, trying to overcome the objection that the Supreme Court had in earlier cases. And so that leads then, what did I contribute? Well, so what? What does -19 mean? So how large is large? So you saw it in one election, but is it actually a feature? Are you seeing a feature of one election, or are you seeing a property of the districting plan? And that's where the analysis I did came in. And I'll quickly run through that. I just grabbed all the data I could in states with relatively large delegations where redistricting is kind of meaningful. Once you're down to the limiting cases, the at-large states, Wyoming, there's no districting. Rhode Island, there are 2 seats, it's not a very interesting problem. So we just ruled a line at 7. We've got 25 states in the analysis covering about 80% of the US population. You've got to do a bit of work on uncontested seats that I won't get too bogged down in. But we got 512 efficiency gap scores where we treat each state year, each state congressional election year as a data point. So we get a score for each state/congressional election year. And so we got 512 of them. And then we just inspect them. And when you inspect them, you can do lots of things. You can look at how they track over time. And this is a running estimate of the median. Negative scores mean Republican advantage. Positive scores mean Democrat advantage. That's just how we've normalized it. We could have done it the other way around, doesn't really matter. And 0 is neutral, right? There's no, each party is wasting votes at roughly the same rate. And you can see this trend towards pro-Republican plans over time. And then, of course, we were litigating North Carolina, so we just showed the court where North Carolina lines up in the empirical distribution of efficiency gap scores, and it's way out here. Right? You can say, this is what you're looking at in this case. That looks like an outlier to us, don't you think? And they go, yeah, that sort of does. And it's not that Democrats don't gerrymander, they do. But it's perfectly possible to create plans that are roughly, close to 0. But the North Carolina legislature has decided to enact this. You can show the trajectory by state and show what happened when North Carolina redistricted, and they went from having plans like this to all of a sudden like this. Like something happened here, and it's called, yes, they redistricted. And you can see a few other states did the same. Under Republicans controlling the redistricting process for the decade after the 2010 census, sometime for the 2012 election. We can also gather the data by who controlled the redistricting, and so that's a little hard to read from your distance, but this is Democrat control, Republican control, or court-ordered or independent commissions, and grouped by decade. So 72 through 80, there's not a lot of differentiation. But what happens is really after 2000, party control of redistricting really the parties start to really use this as a mechanism to confer advantage to themselves. And you've got the independent commissions, sort of roughly pretty close to 0 on average, but Democrat control giving positive, pro-democratic efficiency scores, efficiency gap scores, and Republican control these and this is just the bundle of elections 2012 to 2016. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon, but one that, like I said, the software and map drawing and some facts on the ground, by the way, make it easier to do. Here's some econometric analysis trying to estimate the causal effect of a change. If your state changes from neutral to Democratic or from neutral to Republican control of your redistricting, what's the consequence for the efficiency gap score? And you can see these are typically positive coefficients, but not especially large back here. It's really in recent times that flipping to Democratic control gets you a big jump in your efficiency gap scores in the anticipated pro-democratic direction, and similarly for Republicans, a jump in the Republican direction, but one that's got a little bit more robustness over time. So we did that. That's a nice differences estimate of the effects of party control, and we could keep looking at that. The durability argument, I'll just quickly show you that as well, and that is so what? And a judge literally asked me this. 2012 was special. Obama was on the top of the ticket. How do you know the efficiency gap score you're seeing there is a property of the plan that the Republicans enacted in Wisconsin, and not just a one-off associated with this unusual election where Obama turns out a lot of minorities? And so I did that analysis as well. If this is the first election efficiency gap score, what will you see over the remainder of the elections that the plan is intact? And typically in the US, right, you get redistricting after the census, so on the even year after the top of the decade, so 12, 14, 16, 18, right, and then and 0, 0, and 20, right? So if left undisturbed, a plan will generate typically 5 elections. So if you took the average efficiency gap for the remaining 4, given the first, what sort of relationship do you see? And it's not random, right? The first efficiency gap, the first election efficiency gap is informative, and strongly so, right? The bigger it is, the larger the efficiency gap you'll see over the life of the plan. So we estimated that and showed that to the court as well, to give them some confidence that what would we predict for the remainder of this plan in North Carolina if the court were to leave it undisturbed. We're actually able to summarize that with a histogram. And we also proposed actionable thresholds for the court as well. And this is, I think, the part where the argument gets a little more technical, and we'll see if the court buys it. And then, of course, there's some other technical stuff we did that I haven't got time to show you, but asking if we saw uniform swing, how would the efficiency gap change? And last thing, people, just 1 minute, and then my watch is telling me I should stop. And Sarah's trying to tell me to stop too. Okay, that's good. This is really bizarre. You are, in effect, in dialogue with Justice Kennedy and his clerks. It's all about him. And my sense is, couldn't we just have a nice dinner party and sort it out over a good bottle of wine? Because literally, Kennedy is the swing vote. You're literally in a dialogue with Kennedy. And literally, it's weird as a political science. I don't know about you, but as I'm writing, you've got people looking over your shoulder, imaginary people looking over your shoulder as you write. In this case, it's Justice Kennedy for me. It's very weird. It's very, very weird. Different sort of imaginary audience. This is an interesting problem. How can we help? If they want it to be judicially administrable, we need to give them a tool that does this. How do I infer what the efficiency gap will be before I see any elections under a plan? I've just got a draft set of lines. And so that's a problem I'm currently working on with the team back in the US. There's an interesting counter-argument that we could get into in Q&A, is that gerrymandering is not so much a product of malicious line drawing by Republicans as much as it is the fact that Democrats tend to live together. It's an interesting argument worth our consideration and perhaps discussion. It's important to point out that my work was just a small part of a bigger set of arguments here. And this is just the killer. Like, Republicans aren't even hiding what they did. And so, yes, we set out to gerrymander the state. There's emails, there are taped conversations, there's testimony before committees saying, yes, we're looking to confer advantage. What they were worried about is being sued for a racial gerrymander under the Voting Rights Act. So they said, rather cutely, too coyly, in North Carolina, oh, this isn't a racial gerrymander, this is a partisan gerrymander. Where literally they said that, they were boasting about it. And so the point is, and the lawyers have stressed this all along, you would never be hauled before court if an independent commission was doing the registering, because there the presumption is there would be no discriminatory intent. That's borne out by the data, by the way. When you have an independent commission, you just get much fairer plans. And Australia is actually not a bad case study for that. As is what's happened in California, the switch from partisan control of redistricting to an independent commission, championed, by the way, by none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was governor, who paid the team the great courtesy of coming and sitting in the front row at oral argument in the Supreme Court when Gill went to the Supreme Court. And this is real. This is analysis that is happening literally in real time. This was in the Times a day ago. People are very much focused on the extent to which gerrymandering will help insulate Republicans in 2018 from what are expected to be big swings against them. And this is sort of staggering. We sued in North Carolina, of course, and we sued with state legislative boundaries in Wisconsin, but those states are hardly alone. This is a pernicious, widespread phenomenon in the United States right now. This is an estimate of the statewide swing you'd need to move even just one seat in Ohio right now. That is how the boundaries that Republicans have drawn themselves in a number of states, essentially insulating Republican incumbents from even, politically earthquake magnitude to swing. 6, 5s, and 4s are certainly on the cards. The point is that's what you need to just get one seat, versus if you come to a state that's been registered by independent commission, you just get more marginal seats, and voters feel as though they can actually throw the bastards out, to use a well-worn phrase. I'll stop there. Thanks.